there everybody, and welcome back to Star Wars Lads. This is our first video of 2024 and it's going to be a good one. It's the 2024 Star Wars Bookshelf Tour. I'm here to give you a tour of every single Star Wars book I own, both canon and legends, as well as the comic books and collected editions that I have on my shelves and reference books. It's going to be a nice lengthy video. I hope you all enjoy it. It seems to be one of the big hits every single year. I added a ton of stuff in 2023, so this update should feature a ton of stuff you didn't see in the 2023 Bookshelf Tour video. If you're interested in monthly collection updates though for my Star Wars book collection, I do have a series on my other channel where I go over everything I bought in the world of Star Wars books and comic books. If you're interested in those short-term updates, definitely check out that channel. I'll put a link in the description. As for this video though, make sure you're hitting that like button. It really helps me out with the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and if you would like to see more collecting type videos on the channel, maybe a toy collection video, a single issue comic collection video, Star Wars memorabilia collection videos, let me know because I can oblige with all of those. So before I get started, I want to give a couple disclaimers. First, I give this one every single year. I am mostly a used bookstore collector. I like to support locally. That does mean I will be missing some easier to find Star Wars hardcovers. I know, you don't have to let me know. Most of what you see on the shelves, I'd say a good 90% of what you see on the shelves, I have accumulated through used bookstores. I'm very proud of that with the collection. It also gives me a lot of joy going to used bookshops and trying to see what's next, what could I find. The thrill of the hunt is a big factor for me when I collect. Now, of course, yes, I've bought some of these online because they're really hard to find. I have received a lot of them as gifts, but most of what I personally spent my money on are going to be books that I have found at used bookshops. Secondly, something I get asked every single time in these videos is what is the term SFBC? I use that a lot. SFBC means Science Fiction Book Club. Basically, when Star Wars Legends were still being published, not every book got a standard size hardcover released in the mass market, like your Barnes & Noble or back when Borders bookstore was around. Some Star Wars books only got paperback releases in that market. However, if you were a member of the Science Fiction Book Club, about 6 months or a year after the original paperback was released in the mass markets, you could buy your own hardcover copy of that same paperback. So of course, because there is decreased quantity and it's the exclusive way to get that book in hardcover, those are more valuable. When I do have SFBC hardcovers in the collection, I will specify what they are, so you can kind of see what the difference is between SFBC and standard. I do have a video where I go over all Star Wars book formats and how to collect them. If you want to check it out, I will link it in the cards. All right, without further ado, let's get to the first part of my collection. We're going to start with Legends this time, and we're going to go with Dawn of the Jedi Into the Void by Tim Levin. Jumping tens of thousands of years later into the Old Republic era, we have the tie-ins with the MMORPG, the Old Republic Revan, the Old Republic Deceived, the Old Republic Fatal Alliance, and the Old Republic Annihilation. Next up is the Darth Bane Trilogy by Drew Karpyshyn, some of my favorite Star Wars books of all time. I have Path of Destruction, and then, as you can see, an SFBC hardcover of Rule of Two. It is slightly smaller and thinner than the standard size hardcover I have for Dynasty of Evil. Moving from one favorite Star Wars series to my favorite Star Wars book of all time, this is Darth Plagueis by James Luceno. Then what was a first time read for me in 2023, but I absolutely enjoyed it immensely, Darth Maul Shadowhunter is an excellent dark side book. Moving into The Phantom Menace and beyond, I have Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace novelization by Terry Brooks. There are, I believe, 3 or 4 total covers for this one. I think there are 4 with Anakin, Padme, and Darth Maul also on the cover, but I of course have my favorite character on the cover, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Going after The Phantom Menace now, I have Rogue Planet by Greg Bear, the original Thrawn prequel novel by Timothy Zahn, Outbound Flight, and the book that leads up to the events of Attack of the Clones, Star Wars The Approaching Storm by Alan Dean Foster. Now moving into Attack of the Clones, I have R.A. Salvatore's novelization, and then the first book from the 2003 Clone Wars initiative on the timeline order, which is how my bookshelves are organized. It's Star Wars Jedi Trial. Next we move into the books that tie into the 2008 Star Wars The Clone Wars series, and that begins with the Clone Wars, an adaptation of the film. And then I also have the Clone Wars Wild Space and No Prisoners, These two books I'm still waiting to get my hands on in hardcover, but I do have the trade paperbacks. And then my last trade paperback in my Legends collection is the Clone Wars Gambit Stealth. I'm still missing a good copy of Siege, but these are of course amongst the hardest, especially in the United States, hardest standard size hardcovers to find. Some of my favorite SFBC hardcovers I have are the omnibus of the Republic Commando novels. This is volume 1 containing Hard Contact and 000, and then the incredibly hard to find volume 2, which contains Order 66 and True Colors. And just for good measure, I do have the standard size hardcover of Order 66, which was the only Republic Commando novel to be printed in standard size hardcover. Even though this is technically out of order, but I wanted to keep my Republic Commando books all together on the shelf, I do have Clone Wars Shatterpoint, which is one of my favorite Star Wars novels of all time. If you're interested in Mace Windu at all, you absolutely have to read this. This is the seminal Mace Windu story. Continuing here with the last few Clone Wars books I have to discuss, and that is the MedStar Duology omnibus by Michael Reeves and Steve Perry, Yoda Dark Rendezvous by Sean Stewart, and then I have the excellent unofficial Dark Lord trilogy beginning with Labyrinth of Evil by James Luceno, continuing with Revenge of the Sith by Matthew Stover, and then ending with Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader, also by James Luceno. John Jackson Miller's excellent Obi-Wan Kenobi novel, Kenobi, which deals with Obi-Wan immediately after the events of Revenge of the Sith. I'm missing the Coruscant Knights trilogy omnibus, but I do have the incredibly hard to find SFBC copy of Star Wars The Last Jedi. This is probably the single most valuable Star Wars book in my collection. I also have the Han Solo trilogy, which was the original Legends telling of the origins of Han Solo. The novelization of Star Wars The Force Unleashed, one of my favorite Star Wars video games. And then I have the first of the Lando Calrissian adventures in SFBC hardcover. This is Lando Calrissian and the Mind Harp of Sharu. Only the first and second books were printed in SFBC hardcover. The third book only got a paperback release. Next up is Michael Reeves and Steve Perry's compilation novel, Star Wars Death Star. And then the Han Solo Adventures trilogy, beginning with Han Solo at Star's End, continuing with Han Solo's Revenge, and then ending with the harder to find Han Solo and the Lost Legacy. These are all book club variations of these books as well. Next up, a book we've done a review for on the channel, Death Troopers, one of the best Star Wars horror stories we have in Legends. I don't have the original SFBC hardcover for the first printing of Star Wars, but I do have this compilation which contains all 3 adaptations of the original trilogy in it. There are multiple variations of this cover as well, so I might need to pick these up along the way. The SFBC omnibus of Star Wars Tales, which contains Tales from Mos Eisley Cantina, Tales of the Bounty Hunters, and Tales from Jabba's Palace. And then Timothy Zahn's great early original trilogy stories with Allegiance and Choices of One, starring the original trilogy cast and Mara Jade between the events of A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. Continuing after The Empire Strikes Back, I have Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which was the first ever Star Wars sequel novel. This came out in 1978, and this is the science fiction book club copy of this novel. I also have a book club copy of The Empire Strikes Back novelization, and then a copy of Star Wars Shadows of the Empire, which was the original book that bridged the gap between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. I have a book club copy of Return of the Jedi's novelization. I have the science fiction book club The Bounty Hunter Wars omnibus, which collects all 3 books from that series. This one's not exclusive to SFBC, but I do have the SFBC hardcover of The Truce at Bakura. Then Matthew Stover's homage to 70s and 80s Star Wars stories with Luke Skywalker in the Shadows of Mindor. This is technically the first book in the New Republic era of Star Wars Legends. Dave Wolverton's original telling of the wedding between Han Solo and Princess Leia in The Courtship of Princess Leia. Next is Tatooine Ghost by Troy Denning. And then, of course, the seminal Star Wars stories that really the thing that kicked off the EU, the Thrawn Trilogy, beginning with Heir to the Empire, continuing with Dark Force Rising, and ending with The Last Command. The next EU book series, which was the Jedi Academy trilogy, I have the book club hardcover of this one, which collects all 3 as well. Michael Stackpole's reinterpretation of the Jedi Academy trilogy through the lens of Corran Horn. This is I, Jedi. 2/3 of the really bad Callista trilogy, both of the Barbara Hambly books, Children of the Jedi and Planet of Twilight. I personally think Children of the Jedi is the worst Star Wars book I've ever read. The second worst Star Wars Wars book I've ever read, The Crystal Star by Vonda N. McIntyre. All 3 books of the Black Fleet Crisis in this SFBC omnibus. Christine Catherine Rush's often forgotten The New Rebellion, and then what for all intents and purposes basically rounds out the New Republic era, Timothy Zahn's great duology, the Hand of Thrawn duology, beginning with Spectre of the Past and ending with Vision of the Future. Then Zahn's bridge novel between the New Republic era and New Jedi Order, and that is Survivor's Quest. Moving into the New Jedi Order now, I have all but one book in the series, beginning with Vector Prime, the Dark Tide duology collected in this book club hardcover, James Luceno's Agents of Chaos duology, Greg Key's Edge of Victory duology, Balance Point, the SFBC version of Dark Journey, Aaron Alston's Enemy Lines duology, Matthew Stover's acclaimed Traitor in SFBC hardcover, Destiny's Way, Sean Williams and Shane Dick's trilogy Force Heretic, Greg Key's The Final Prophecy in SFBC hardcover, and the final book in the series, James Luceno's The Unifying Force. Next, the bridge book between the New Jedi Order and Legacy of the Force, we have the Dark Nest trilogy, all collected in one SFBC hardcover. And then I will move into Legacy of the Force, beginning with the first book, Betrayal, continuing with the SFBC copies of Bloodline, the second book, Tempest, the third book, and Exile, the fourth book, the fifth book, Sacrifice, and then 3 more SFBC only versions of these books, Inferno, Fury, and of course, Revelation. And the last book in the series, Invincible. Next, I have Millennium Falcon by James Luceno. And then we get into the final book series of Star Wars Legends, Fate of the Jedi, with the first book, Outcast, the second book, Omen, the third book, Abyss, the fourth book, Backlash, the fifth book, Allies, the sixth book, Vortex, the 7th book, Conviction, the 8th book, Ascension, and the 9th and final book, Apocalypse. So that concludes the hardcovers I have for Star Wars Legends. Next, we're going to move on to paperback only releases that I own. Begins with one that not a lot of people remember, and that is the Star Wars Galaxies video game tie-in book, The Ruins of Dantooine. We then continue with the first in a canceled new series that spun off from Republic Commando, Imperial Commando. This is the first book and only book that came out, 501st. Next is the X-Wing series, and I do have all 4 of the original Rogue Squadron stories with X-Wing Rogue Squadron, X-Wing Wedge's Gamble, X-Wing The Krytos Trap, and X-Wing The Bacta War. I do have a few of the Wraith Squadron books. I have book 5, which is the first Wraith Squadron book, Wraith Squadron. I do have book 6, Iron Fist, and I have book 7, Solo Command. I'm missing both books 8 and 9. And then finally, from the paperback only Star Wars releases, I do have both Star Wars Tales from the Empire and Star Wars Tales from the New Republic. So I do have a variety of other Star Wars paperbacks, but most of them are repeats and kind of reader copies of things you've already seen on the shelf. So I'm only going to go over the paperbacks that I have for things you haven't already seen. Beginning with this copy of Maul Lockdown that I hope to upgrade to hardcover eventually. Continuing with 2 of the 3 Coruscant Knights trilogy books, Jedi Twilight and Patterns of the Force. I also have Star Wars Shadow Games as well as Scourge. And then that brings me to my Young Jedi Knights paperback collection eventually. Again, I hope to get the SFBC hardcovers of that series. But we begin with the Shadow Academy stories, starting with the first book in the series, Heirs of the Force, continuing with the second book, Shadow Academy, the third book, The Lost Ones, the fourth book, Lightsabers, the fifth book, Darkest Night, and the sixth book, Jedi Under Siege. Continuing with the rest of the series, I have the seventh book, Shards of Alderaan, the eighth book, Diversity Alliance, the ninth book, Delusions of Grandeur, the 10th book, Jedi Bounty, the 11th book, The Emperor's Plague, the 12th book, Return to Ord Mantell, Trouble on Cloud City, and the final book, Crisis at Crystal Reef. Before we move on to junior novels, I do have my first copy of a Star Wars adventure journal book. I believe this is book 7. Okay, next to junior novels, or sometimes people call them chapter books, I do have Jude Watson's Legacy of the Force and Secrets of the Jedi, then the only hardcover in the Jedi Quest series with Jedi Quest, and the Boba Fett series hardcover, The Fight to Survive. And I have book 2 of the Barnes & Noble hardcover of the Jedi Prince series. I've passed on book 1 so many times, I probably should have bought it at this point, but here's a copy of book 2 that I found very cheap. Okay, now getting into junior novels here, the paperback junior novels. I have most of the Jedi Apprentice series, not all of it, starting with Dave Wolverton, the only one he wrote, The Rising Force, and then getting into the Jude Watson novels, The Dark Rival, The Hidden Past, The Mark of the Crown, The Defenders of the Dead, The Uncertain Path, The Captive Temple, The Day of Reckoning, The Fight for Truth, The Shattered Peace, The Deadly Hunter, The Evil Experiment, The Death of Hope, and the last in the main series I have, The Call to Vengeance. Then I have one of the 2 special editions, and this is the first one, Deception. I only have a single book in the Episode 1 Journal series, and this is Anakin Skywalker. Out of the Jude Watson series, Jedi Quest is by far the one I'm lacking in the most, having the hardest time finding in stores. I have The Trail of the Jedi, The Master of Disguise, and I have The Shadow Trap. I have the complete paperback Boba Fett series, beginning with the first book, The Fight to Survive, the second book, Crossfire, the third book, The Maze of Deception, the fourth book, Hunted, the fifth book, A New Threat, the sixth book, Pursuit. And interestingly enough, on the sixth book, if you have a first printing, the side on the spine here, it only says Star and not Wars. Jude Watson's final series for Star Wars junior novels. I have the first book, The Desperate Mission, the second book, Dark Warning, the third book, Underworld, the fourth book, Death on Naboo, the fifth book, A Tangled Web, the sixth book, Return of the Dark Side, the seventh book, Secret Weapon, the eighth book, Against the Empire, the ninth book, Master of Deception, and the 10th book, Reckoning. Like Episode 1 Journal, I only have one book in the main Star Wars journal line, and that is Luke Skywalker's book, The Fight for Justice. I have 4 of the 6 books in the Rebel Force series. I have Hostage, Renegade, Firefight, and Trapped. I have one of the 2 Star Wars Science Adventures books. This is Journey Across Planet X. Interestingly enough, Planet X brought back into canon as the home of the Nameless in the High Republic. Definitely the series of junior novels I want to complete most. I have a huge love for this series and affinity for this series, but it is the Galaxy of Fear series. I have a few books in the series. I have the first one, Eaten Alive, the second one, City of the Dead, the fourth one, The Nightmare Machine, the sixth one, Army of Terror, and the seventh one, The Brain Spider. Next is the much maligned Jedi Prince series. I have all 6 books. I have The Glove of Darth Vader, The Lost City of the Jedi, Zorba the Hutt's Revenge, Mission from Mount Yoda, Queen of the Empire, and finally, Prophets of the Dark Side. The second junior novel series that I very much so want to complete, and I'm almost there, I have 5 out of 6 books, are the Junior Jedi Knights series. I have the first book, The Golden Globe, the second book, Lyrics World, the third book, Promises, the fourth book, Anakin's Quest, and the fifth book, Vader's Fortress. And then I have a hodgepodge of Star Wars missions books. I'm not too actively searching for these ones, but I do pick them up when I can find them for a decent price. I have the first book, the fourth book, Destroy the Liquidator, the ninth book, Revolt of the Battle Droids, the 10th book, Showdown in Mos Eisley, and the 16th book, Imperial Jailbreak. And then to conclude the Legends section of my books in my bookshelf tour, I do have some random cool things I just wanted to throw out there. I mentioned I wasn't going to show any of the paperbacks I had that were either reader copies or duplicates of things I've already shown you in hardcover. Well, the only one I'll show you is this one, which is a first printing of the original Star Wars from the Adventures of Luke Skywalker. This came out in 1976, before the film even released, so technically this is the first piece of Star Wars ever. I also found this inboxed cassette audiobook of Dark Forces Soldier for the Empire, and then I have this sealed box set of paperbacks for the Jedi Academy trilogy that I think is really cool. Moving into Legends comics now, I do have volume 1 of the Old Republic omnibus. I have volume 1 of the Rise of the Sith omnibus, volume 1 of the Empire omnibus, volume 2 of the Empire omnibus, the classic Star Wars comics Droids and Ewoks omnibus, and then unfortunately still missing volume 1 of the original Marvel years, but I have volume 2 and volume 3. I have the Rebellion omnibus volume 1, and I also have the New Republic omnibus volume 1. Let's move on to Epic Collections and trade paperbacks. I do have all 3 volumes of Tales of the Jedi. I have Tales of the Jedi Volume 1, Tales of the Jedi Volume 2, and Tales of the Jedi Volume 3. I have the 2 Old Republic epics that weren't collected into the omnibus. Hopefully we get these maybe in a smaller omnibus or oversized hardcover one day. Probably not, but we can dream. Old Republic Volume 4, which has most of the MMO, RPG tie-in stuff. And then Old Republic Volume 5, which features Knight Errant and stuff like Jedi vs. Sith. I have 3 of the 4 Clone Wars Epic Collections. I am shocked this hasn't gotten an omnibus yet, but this is the Clone Wars Volume 1, the Clone Wars Volume 3, and the Clone Wars Volume 4. I only have a couple of epics from the New Republic series, considering a lot of them are getting collected into omnibus, but I do have Volume 5, Dark Empire, and Volume 6, which is the Crimson Empire stuff. And my last epic collection that I own is Volume 1 of Legacy. Still holding out for the omnibus of this. I know there's some cool old school hardcovers from Dark Horse that I might end up trying to get my hands on, considering they're kind of just as expensive as the epic collections these days. But why do we not have an omnibus of this? When it comes to my Legends trade paperbacks and standard size hardcovers, a lot of them are just odds and ends that I've collected over the years or grown up with and had a hard time giving up, even though a lot of them are duplicates, starting with this small copy of Knight Errant. This is Volume 1 in hardcover. And then I have my childhood copy of the Phantom Menace trade paperback, Darth Maul Death Sentence, and then 6 of the digest-sized Clone Wars volumes. I have Shipyards of Doom, Crash Course, The Wind Raiders of Talaran, In Service of the Republic, Hero of the Confederacy, and The Star Crusher Trap. Stuff that is definitely a duplicate now with my recently acquired Empire Omnibus Volume 2, but I love these hardcovers, some of my early ones that I collected, in Darth Vader, The Cry of Shadows, Darth Vader and the Ghost Prison, and Darth Vader and the Ninth Assassin. Technically not a comic book, but this is a trade paperback copy of Dark Forces Soldier for the Empire. It has some art in it. It's the novella of the series, so it has the whole thing in here. It's the size of a comic book. It's the size of a trade paperback. Next we have the trade paperback for Boba Fett, Enemy of the Empire. Another repeat with the trade paperback of Empire Volume 1, Star Wars Honor and Duty, and Star Wars Rebellion Volume 2. Next is one of the final Dark Horse miniseries. This was Star Wars Rebel Heist, the trade paperback of the adaptation of Splinter of the Mind's Eye for the comic book format. I have this old school Dark Horse omnibus. I know a lot of people collect these. I never really got too into these. I prefer the oversized format, but this is the Early Victories omnibus, which collects Splinter of the Mind's Eye in it and a variety of other stories that I already have in other formats. And then I have 3 of the Star Wars Adventures digest-sized volumes. Again, stuff that doesn't seem to be coming to the Marvel books anytime soon, but this is Chewbacca and the Slavers of the Shadowlands, Princess Leia and the Royal Ransom, and The Will of Darth Vader. I also have a trade paperback of Dark Force Rising, one of my favorites because I do actually want to collect this whole Dark Horse 30th anniversary Star Wars hardcover collection. I think that the style and the spines, they're very cool, but I do have Star Wars Union. I have all of Legacy 2 in Dark Horse trade paperbacks. I have a standard size hardcover of The Star Wars, which is the adaptation of George Lucas's original scripts for Star Wars. This is a really interesting, cool read. I mean, something obviously doesn't feel too Star Warsy, but is a really cool piece of history. And then finally, I do have all 6 volumes of Star Wars Tales in trade paperback, mostly because there are some things, like I just mentioned, that aren't collected in any of the Marvel epics or omnibus yet, as well as just the fact that it's nice to read them in release order. Tales Volume 1, Tales Volume 2, Tales Volume 3, Tales Volume 4, Tales Volume, which that's actually my favorite cover. And actually Volume 5 does rival it though with the Darth Maul cover. And then Volume 6 is the Stormtrooper cover. Honestly kind of basic, but all good stuff here. Really good stuff. Definitely check it out if you haven't read it. So here's a look at my Legends shelf. This has to start out with, of course, my helmets and a mask of Palpatine, and something every Star Wars fan needs in their collection, a plush of Max Rebo. We go down here to the first shelf, which features most of the Old Republic, pre-Phantom Menace, post-Phantom Menace, and Clone Wars books I have. Moving down here to the Clone Wars, Revenge of the Sith, Dark Times era, and the end of the original trilogy era into a beginning of the New Republic. Go down here even more to the New Republic books and the beginning and most of, really, the New Jedi Order. Here's the end of the New Jedi Order, the Legacy of the Force, and then the Fate of the Jedi books. And then we go down even farther here to my shelf that has the paperback only books, as well as the paperback books that I don't have yet in any form in hardcover, my Young Jedi Knights books, as well as the hardcovers for junior novels and the Adventure Journal book I have. And then back down here, all of the junior novels that I have
as well as a bunch of paperbacks that I have that don't have a home, really. They're duplicates and extras.
Okay, now getting into my Star Wars canon novels. We're going to begin, obviously, with a huge stack of High Republic. Once again, they are in timeline order, and that means we begin with the High Republic Convergence, continue with the High Republic Path of Deceit, the script version of the audio drama The High Republic, The Battle of Jeddah, my favorite book from the High Republic Phase 2, The High Republic Cataclysm, and then the last Phase 2 book, The High Republic Path of Vengeance, which I loaned out to my sister, so I only have the slipcover here. Next is Light of the Jedi, which is probably my favorite High Republic book, Into the Dark by Claudia Gray, the target cover of The Rising Storm, which personally might be my favorite cover of any High Republic book thus far. Also got the target cover of Out of the Shadows, and the Barnes & Noble copy of The Fallen Star. Finishing off Phase 1 of the High Republic, I have Midnight Horizon. We review our books through audio copies, so I have yet to pick up a physical copy of The Eye of Darkness, but hopefully soon, and I do need to add eventually Tempest Runner, which is not one of my favorites, but also listen to that via audio. Speaking of audio dramas, though, I do have the script version for maybe my favorite audio drama in Star Wars canon, and that is Dooku Jedi Lost. Next is Kirsten White's young Obi-Wan book, Padawan, and an excellent Claudia Gray novel about Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan before The Phantom Menace, and that is Master and Apprentice. Moving to the Queen's Trilogy, as many of you know, if you watch our content regularly, these are books I've yet to read still, but I do have all three of them. The first book technically in the series is Queen's Shadow, even though Queen's Peril does take place prior to it in the timeline, and then it all wraps up with Queen's Hope. Mike Chen's excellent Obi-Wan and Anakin book that sees Anakin transition from who he is in Attack of the Clones to who he is in the Clone Wars, and that is Brotherhood. And then one of the harder Star Wars canon books to find, and easily one of my favorites out of all of Star Wars canon, Dark Disciple. Easily, in my opinion, the most underrated Star Wars canon book of all time. Came out pretty early in canon. It's a prequel to Rogue One. Catalyst by James Luceno. Easily my favorite trilogy of Star Wars canon is Timothy Zahn's Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy, beginning with the first book, Chaos Rising, continuing with the second book, Greater Good, and ending with one of the longest Star Wars books of all time, but one of my favorites, Lesser Evil. Alright, next shelf, we're continuing with E.K. Johnston's Ahsoka, an underrated early canon novel, Lords of the Sith, James Luceno's seminal Tarkin story, titled Tarkin, from what I've heard, a pretty underrated prequel to Solo: A Star Wars Story, and this is Ray Carson's Most Wanted. Timothy Zahn's Canon Thrawn Trilogy begins with the first book titled Thrawn, which is an excellent book, definitely check it out. Thrawn Alliances, which is a step down, but I felt like got kind of unfairly criticized when it came out. It's still a really good book. And Thrawn Treason, which I feel is kind of underrated at this point. This is a great book. The Jyn Erso young adult book Rebel Rising by Beth Revis. The hard to find and first Star Wars canon book, A New Dawn by John Jackson Miller. The most controversial book of 2023, Jedi Battle Scars, which I will say was pretty disappointing. The go-to for telling people where to start with Star Wars canon, Lost Stars by Claudia Gray, the one that put Claudia Gray on most of our Star Wars maps. Her next young adult book, which was Leia, Princess of Alderaan, Alexander Freed's novelization of Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Star Wars from a Certain Point of View, which is the only From a Certain Point of View book I own. I do need to get The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi ones. The two Battlefront books, Battlefront Twilight Company and Battlefront Inferno Squad. By far my least favorite canon book I've ever read, Heir to the Jedi. The Princess and the Scoundrel by Beth Revis, telling the canon story of Han and Leia's wedding. By far my second least favorite canon book I've ever read. This is Chuck Wendig's first Aftermath book, but the Aftermath books do get progressively better, and Life Debt is a step up from the first book. And then in my opinion, Empire's End is by far the best of the trilogy. That takes me to Alphabet Squadron, which last year, if you watched last year's bookshelf tour, I said were definitely the biggest books in Star Wars canon that I had yet to read. Well, now I've read them, and I'm actually pretty happy I did. All three of these are really solid. The first one being called Alphabet Squadron, the second one, Alphabet Squadron Shadowfall, and the final one, and arguably the best, Alphabet Squadron Victory's Price. Next, we have Daniel Jose Older's Last Shot, which does have two covers. I've chosen the Lando cover. I think it's pretty awesome. Poe Dameron Free Fall by Alex Segura. One of my favorite Star Wars canon books, Shadow of the Sith by Adam Christopher. And then the book that I do say is my favorite canon book, Bloodline by Claudia Gray. Kind of an underrated young adult book at this point, Kevin Shinnick's Force Collector. Another pretty underrated book, and I hope people go back to this after Inquisitor Rise of the Red Blade, is Delilah S. Dawson's first Star Wars canon book, Phasma. Next, we have the Force Awakens novelization by Alan Dean Foster, the compilation book Canto Bight, Delilah S. Dawson's semi-sequel to Phasma, Black Spire, The Last Jedi novelization, also called the Expanded Edition, our bridge novel between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, Resistance Reborn, the Galaxy's Edge book that nobody really talks about, A Crash of Fate, and finally the Expanded Edition novelization of The Rise of Skywalker. I also have the only non-canon book published in the Disney era of Star Wars, and that is Star Wars Ronin, a Visions novel. I'm still missing a lot of the Star Wars canon short story books, but I do have Stories of Jedi and Sith, which I picked up at Star Wars Celebration 2022, so this is the convention cover. I also have George Mann's Myths and Fables, as well as George Mann and Kevin Scott's Life Day Treasury, which serves also to be kind of in that Myths and Fables style storytelling, missing Dark Legends. And then I have The Legends of Luke Skywalker. Let's move on to the junior novels for Star Wars canon, and I do have the 2 junior novels for Phase 2 of the High Republic, Quest for the Hidden City, and Quest for Planet X. I do also have all 3 junior novels from the High Republic Phase 1, A Test of Courage, Race to Crash Point Tower, and Mission to Disaster. My junior novels for Star Wars canon are kind of in a random order. They're based on kind of size and type more so than timeline order, but I do have Star Wars Forces of Destiny. This is the box set with all 4 books in it. The only Choose Your Adventure book I have for Star Wars canon is a Han and Chewie adventure. And then I have a bunch of the Rebels chapter books, tie-ins, the kind of adaptations of the show, starting with The Rebellion Begins, and then continuing into the main series with Rise of the Rebels, Ezra's Duel with Danger in hardcover. This is one of those Abdo hardcovers that I believe were made for libraries, and then Battle to the End, which I think is the last one. I also finally added one book in the Servants of the Empire series. This is the first book, Edge of the Galaxy. I have the junior novel of Guardians of the Whills by Greg Rucka, and then I have the 4 2015 junior novels, 3 of them which were Journey to the Force Awakens, Smuggler's Run, The Weapon of a Jedi, Moving Target, and then finally Before the Awakening. The last couple junior novels I have here are Lando's Luck, and then the often forgotten Tales from a Galaxy Far, Far Away, Aliens Volume 1, of which there was no Volume 2. Let's move on to comic book collected editions, and I will start out with my omnibus. I do have a Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith, Charles Soule's run. I also have a first printing of Volume 1 of Dr. Aphra. Recently, I picked up Dr. Aphra Volume 2, which I'm a little disappointed only collects the first half of the run. A rare pickup I made at a half-price books actually this year, who usually upcharge on expensive books, but this was Kanan the Last Padawan. This oversized hardcover, it's not an omnibus, but it's an oversized hardcover, and it's been out of print for a while now. And then I have all 3 Age of oversized hardcovers, starting with Age of Republic, continuing with Age of Rebellion, and ending with Age of Resistance. Moving on to canon trade paperbacks, of which I certainly have a love-hate relationship with. I'm on and off again with buying these because so much of it gets upgraded into omnibus, which is my preferred format, so I don't like to drop the money twice, especially because the trade paperbacks are so hard to resell. But I do have the first volume of the High Republic Phase 2 line, Balance of the Force. I didn't pick up the second one because it got announced that an omnibus is coming out, so I thought, why waste my money? I did pick up a copy of the Darth Maul miniseries, read this in singles back in the day, but it doesn't seem like it will ever get collected in any other type of format. Super underrated first miniseries of Star Wars canon, Darth Maul, Son of Dathomir. A really solid adaptation of Timothy Zahn's Thrawn novel. This is Jody Hauser's Thrawn adaptation miniseries. Han Solo Imperial Cadet, another underrated miniseries that ties into Solo, a Star Wars story. Lando Double or Nothing, which is honestly one of the worst Star Wars comics I've read. Target Vader, which introduced Valance to Star Wars canon. Both volumes of the Han Solo and Chewbacca short-lived mainline. And then almost all of the volumes of the stuff that originally wasn't collected in the Jason Aaron omnibus of the 2015 Star Wars line. These I probably will be getting rid of to upgrade to the Greg Pak and Kieran Gillen omnibus. But as of now, I do have Volume 8, Mutiny on Mon Cala. Volume 9, Hope Dies, which is honestly one of the best volumes of the entire series. You should definitely check this one out. Volume 10, The Escape. Volume 11, The Scourging of Shu Torren. And then beginning the Greg Pak stuff, Volume 12, Rebels and Rogues, and then also volume 13, Rogues and Rebels. And then the Charles Soule 2020 Star Wars line. I've been in and out on these ones, reading them in singles versus trades, so I only have a few of the trades and they're kind of sporadic. I have volume 1, The Destiny Path, volume 2, Operation Starlight, volume 5, The Path to Victory, and volume 6, Quests of the Force. I felt the same way about the Greg Pak 2020 Darth Vader line. I've alternated between reading singles at times and trade paperbacks, but the trades I have are Dark Heart of the Sith, Volume 1, Into the Fire, Volume 2, The Shadow's Shadow, Volume 5, and Return of the Handmaidens, Volume 6. I'll repeat myself again, alternated between singles and trades for Bounty Hunters, although Bounty Hunters is a weird one. I haven't been pushing buying the trades for Vader and Star Wars because I figure it will most likely get omnibuses for both of those series, since we've got omnibus in all the other parts of those series. But Bounty Hunters is a weird one. It has a cult following, but I don't know if we'll ever get an omnibus for this. Maybe. Marvel seems to be kind of producing omnibus for everything now at this point, but as of now I have volume 1 of Bounty Hunters, Galaxy's Deadliest, Volume 2, Target Valance, Volume 4, Crimson Reign, and Volume 5, The Raid on the Vermilion. I also have the trade paperback for Hidden Empire, one that's actually pretty difficult to find. This is TIE Fighter, a tie-in to the Alphabet Squadron novel. I also have The Rise of Kylo Ren, which I read a second time this year and actually did enjoy more than I did previously. And then I have the only 2 volumes of Poe Dameron that I didn't read in singles. I keep waiting for an omnibus for this, and maybe we'll get one day, but it doesn't seem likely at this point. It's been years since this series ended, but I have Volume 4, Legend Found, and Volume 5, The Spark and the Fire. I have the Star Wars Galaxy's Edge tie-in trade paperback, and the Journey to the Rise of Skywalker miniseries, which I really didn't like, Star Wars Allegiance. I picked up my first trade paperback for Hyperspace Stories. Haven't gotten to read this yet. This past year I found a cool hardcover that collected all the Vader's Castle stuff called Beware Vader's Castle, and also have the hardcover of Tales from the Rancor Pit. I have all 3 volumes of the current Star Wars The High Republic manga, The Edge of Balance Volume 1, The Edge of Balance Volume 2, and the Phase 2 Edge of Balance book, The Edge of Balance Precedent. So here's one last look at the collection here. Here's the Canon shelf. I do have a signed receipt up there by Ryan Johnson, who my mom ran into in the lobby of a movie theater when we went to a Bay Area premiere of Knives Out. Long story, funny story, I'll tell it one time. Here's the first shelf of Canon books. Here's the second shelf of Canon books. The third shelf of Canon books. Got my Canon trade paperbacks and junior novels there. And then as we go down here, I have my omnibus. I have all the omnibus on the same shelf so they fit better with the start of my Epic collections. And then I get to the bottom and have my Epic collections and my Legends trade paperbacks, as well as that hardcover of the newspaper strips and some random extra paperback books. Okay, moving on to the last section here. Hopefully you guys are all still bearing with me on this longer video, but I am finally going to be doing reference books. I don't have too many of them. A lot of requests for me to show them off this year in my update. But I don't have a huge collection, so this one should go fast. These are really in no particular order. We're going to start out with Star Wars Year by Year, a visual chronicle. It comes in this cool slipcase, a pretty neat history book, really, for Star Wars. Just because of the size, I also had this over there. Forgot about it. It's the Mos Eisley Cantina pop-up book. These are some of my favorites. These are from my childhood. Very beat up, very loved, but they're the visual dictionaries. I lived off of this when I was a kid. This is the Phantom Menace one, The Attack of the Clones, and of course my favorite, and certainly the most loved of these, Revenge of the Sith. I read this endlessly. And then finally, honestly, this one looks the most loved and beat up. I did really like this one as well. This is the original Trilogy Visual Dictionary. And in the spirit of my childhood, I did pick up the Force Awakens Visual Dictionary when it came out. Obviously didn't really look at it that much as an adult, so I never picked up any of the other ones for the Disney films, but maybe one day. When Disney bought Star Wars and we switched from Dark Horse to Marvel, and a lot of Star Wars books ended up going on sale, and they were bargain price at Barnes & Noble, so I picked this up. This was the Comics Companion, a really neat book. I always really enjoyed going through this. I also picked up Star Wars Panel to Panel. This is volume 2. It showcases some of the best splash pages and covers from across Star Wars Legends comics. I have the book Star Wars Absolutely Everything You Need to Know. In fact, this is not everything you need to know because there has been plenty more that has come out since this book came out. I've had this book forever. This is the Obsessed with Star Wars. I remember my parents buying me this on a plane, I think in a trip in like 2007 or 8. Played this religiously, this game. A lot of Star Wars facts come from this book in my head, so I have this to thank for a lot of my Star Wars knowledge. I don't have too many art of books, but I did get all of the art of books for the sequel trilogy, mostly because all of them eventually went on dramatic sales. The Force Awakens is certainly the one I enjoyed looking through the most, but The Last Jedi's is also pretty cool. And then in some ways, The Rise of Skywalker is just the most disappointing. There's so many cool ideas that never got realized. Had a yard sale this year, went through a old box and found this. It's a Play a Sound Star Wars A New Hope book from my childhood. Completely forgot about this, brought back a lot of memories. One of my favorite art styles in a reference book was the new Essential Chronology. This book is very, very cool. I really would love to be a writer one day, a screenwriter, and so I jumped on the chance when I saw this book, the Episode 1 Phantom Menace adapted screenplay. Although it's not necessarily the greatest screenplay ever written, it is always very interesting to analyze how somebody as talented as George Lucas goes about their writing of the script. Finally, I'll lump these in there because a lot of people enjoyed that I had these last year. These are all books from when I was a little kid. Skywalker Family album, Attack the Clones, I'm a Jedi Apprentice, I Am a Droid, Qui-Gon Jinn, I Am a Jedi, and I believe the Jar Jar Binks one. Yep, watch out Jar Jar. These, I don't know if I was ever that into these. When I got into Star Wars, I was around 5, so I was a little above this reading level, but still these were something that I constantly looked at the pictures at often as a kid. Lastly, I have the IDW collection of the classic newspaper strips from Star Wars. This is volume 1. Not sure if the series is still printed. I doubt it. I'd love to collect the rest of these. All right, so we're gonna end this video with the last thing. I keep thinking of more things to show, but I know you guys enjoy these types of videos, so hopefully you're enjoying this one. Last thing I'm gonna go over are signed books. I keep those kind of tucked away in a safe place, and I forgot to do some of them last year, so here we go. Let's start with them. I had a copy of my favorite Star Wars canon book, Bloodline, signed by Claudia Gray at Star Wars Celebration 2022. When I was living in the Bay Area, I went to a signing of Anthony Daniels' biography that he did for I Am C-3PO. I guess it's an autobiography. He did sign this one for me, so that was pretty neat. I had a whole story about this one on my other channel. If you watch my collection update videos, I ordered this in May of 2022, and it finally arrived this year in like August or July. I forgot when. It was a whole mix-up, but I was happy that Goldsboro finally sent me it. It's a signed copy by Adam Christopher. I do also have signed copies of both Aftermath Life Debt and Aftermath Empire's End by Chuck Wendig. And that is officially it for this update, this 2024 Star Wars Bookshelf Collection Tour. Thank you so much for watching. Of course, if you haven't hit that like button, really helps me out. Hit that like button. Show your support for the channel. If you want to see more Star Wars collection videos like I mentioned at the beginning, let me know. I have a variety of Star Wars memorabilia. Comment below, let me know what your favorite parts of this video were. What are your favorite pieces of my Star Wars collection? What are some of your favorite pieces of your Star Wars collection? Let me know. And of course, subscribe to the channel for more Star Wars content coming here at you very soon. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and I will see you all next time.